So it certainly is a warm welcome here. This is about the same temperature actually as the Boston area, today at least, right? So one of the things I want to talk about today is the future of engineering education in the United States. And what I hope to convince you of is, in this order, is first of all, that engineering in the last century, that is the 1900 to the year 2000, has done some important and significant things for you and for me. That is, life is very different today than it was, say, a century ago. Not only because of the products of engineering, but engineering has contributed very significantly to what has actually happened. But having said that, then, I want to talk about what I'm calling indicators and warnings in engineering education. So, and that's what I think is what it is. There's lots of data. What's a little unclear is what does it all mean, and that's why I want to kind of introduce the data to you and discuss at least some potential hypotheses, and then let's see where it actually goes. Then I want to discuss with you at least what some recent national studies have said about engineering in the year 2020. Obviously, we're not there yet. And finally, what must be done? And I'm going to show you some of the conclusions of a number of high-level commissions which have looked at what they assert must be done, and we can debate whether or not you think these are the right kind of things to be done, in a sense to correct, to fix some of the issues that are seen with engineering education. Well, this is a set of pictures. These pictures are all changing. There's actually supposed to be 100 of these, right? One of the things I hope you notice, just look at all those pictures, and what do you see there? You see telephones and planes and brain scanners and satellites and congestion, gridlock, pictures of the Earth from space, computers, trucks, and so on. Lots of different things. What I'm going to assert to you is that these are all actually pictures of these things. So in the year 2000, in the year 2000, there were lots of these studies that looked at, what's coming next, or and so on. The National Academy of Engineering did a study which took a look at what were the great engineering achievements of the last century. That is 1900 to the year 2000. Essentially, they asked this question: what were the things that were around in the year 2000 that most people recognize, and were not around in the year 1900, or at least they may have been around but were only nascent then, that have substantially changed our lives? And they rank ordered them. There's actually 100 in the list. This is the first 20. So this is a rank ordered list of the engineering, let's call it systems, that they believed were most important to changing the quality of life in the United States, it turns out, as we know it. So it's a rank-ordered list. So first of all, they said electrification, and that kind of makes some sense. I'm not entirely sure if I would have put it as number one, but it's certainly extraordinarily important. Here we have lights and electricity enables an enormous number of things to do. And for the vast majority of the United States, that did not exist 100 years before that. The automobile has, by any measure, contributed immensely both to personal mobility and to the ability to transport goods backwards and forwards across this country in ways that are just staggering. The fact that we can regularly buy, at least in Massachusetts, I'm sure here, fruits all throughout the year where it's actually cold most of the time there is an indication of the fact there's a transportation network across the country which is supplying these kind of things, right? The airplane, that again has enabled a modern forms of transportation which relative to the year 1900 just wouldn't exist. The fact that I could fly down here this morning, a trip of probably 1,000 miles or more, go back tomorrow, or I very, very frequently, because of the life I live, go down to Washington for the day, have a meeting, and fly back, in the same day, or not so frequently, but I've gone to Dallas a fair amount for meetings and back. This is a kind of lifestyle that you couldn't conceive of living 100 years before that. let's not debate whether it's a good lifestyle. Let's just say you can conceive of living it, right? I personally think that water supply and distribution is actually the most important, because this has saved more lives, has contributed more to extending the lifespan in the United States and in other countries than almost anything you can think about. Access to clean water makes an enormous difference to the quality of our lives. Right? But this is the NAE rank order list. Electronics, and you see computers on that. You see the telephone, air conditioning, refrigerator. I mean, just going in and out of this building here, think how different life was in the South before air conditioning came along, right? I mean, it's changed the nature of Washington. I mean, they actually go year-round now, and they didn't used to do that. Again, we could debate whether this is a good thing or not, but it's, you know, that's what it's done. Highways, spacecraft, the internet, you see household appliances, nuclear technologies, high-performance material. The point is, these are all products of engineers and engineering, and they have changed our lives in deep and substantial ways. You know, and by the way, not just in technological ways. You know, there have been studies done, for example, take a look at number 2 there on the automobile. How the interaction between the automobile and the growth of the suburbs, the growth of, you know, families which now extend across America, you know, the change in lifestyles associated with these. So I'm going to argue that these changes are not just technological changes, they're cultural and social changes that are enabled by this kind of engineering. Now, this is from the Dean of Engineering at MIT, so give credit where credit is due. He asserts that engineering has changed the fabric of society. That you have to appreciate that associated with this is a huge amount of innovation. And innovation is actually a product of lots of different things. It's research, it's inventors, it's the government and companies. This is an important theme I'm going to come back to. The other thing you have to appreciate is that these products of engineering are not just a product of a single kind of engineering. It's actually lots of different kinds of engineering come together. And finally, a very important point is that usually what you should have noticed about all those things is that they're not by and large single technological products. They're by and large systems. There's a transportation system, right? And the internet is a system. And electrification is not just, you know, electricity going over wires, but it's electricity on substations and a power grid distribution systems and so on. And that's extremely important as well, that this change is not, this idea that it's single inventors, kind of the Thomas Edison viewpoint of engineering, is just history. It's just no longer the case. What is the case is that modern engineering, it's not the only way it impacts our society, but a major way it impacts our society is by creating complex technological systems. Right? Now, what's also, of course, happened, the astute among you will immediately realize that there is both good and bad associated with these complex systems, right? So, we talk about the good things. I mentioned some of the good things, but they also introduce challenges. So, you know, we create this complex transportation system, and simultaneously what we find is the roads are fine for a while, and then they become gridlocked. So, you know, before in the Boston area, before the so-called Big Dig, which you as taxpayers have spent $16 billion on now, the projection was for 8 hours of gridlock through the city of Boston every working day. You know, the road system was just a collapse through all the cars that were going through it. So in a sense, that's the flip side of creating a modern transportation system. You now create a congested transportation system. We also know the fact that we all live better and use more electricity is also creating this growth in worldwide energy demand. I mean, we've seen it lately in oil prices, but you see in the demand for more and more energy usage, which means more and more power plants and so on. So there's a cycle that's going on here. So the point I want to get across to you is that we create these systems, and simultaneously they create opportunities for us, but they also create problems. I mean, a wonderful example is the internet. The internet creates many good things in terms of sharing information, right? It also creates the problem of spam. It creates the problem as people who are terrorists like Al-Qaeda have shown they use the internet extraordinarily effectively as a mechanism to in this case, pass hate around and to pass messages around between these terrorist allies. Right? There's good and bad associated with all these things. It shows that the world of engineering and these engineering systems is just constantly adapting and changing our lives. Now, one of the things I want to show you, which is really kind of interesting, is that how much it's the case that the thing that we call engineering is actually shifting. So, because I want to definitely give you the impression that engineering is not a static way of thinking. So, if you looked in 1950 at the MIT School of Engineering and you asked the question, what did MIT think were the disciplines of engineering? This is what they thought. They thought there was something called civil engineering, mechanical engineering, there was something called metallurgy, electrical engineering, chemical, there was something called general engineering, there was a whole field called sanitary engineering, naval architecture, economics, and so on, and aeronautical engineering. Right? So here in 2000 is what they think. So these are the names of the departments, and what it's showing you is the evolution, at least in this one university, of engineering. So sanitary engineering has disappeared. So actually, metallurgy has disappeared. There's now material science. Computer science has emerged. In 1950, there was no discipline called computer science. There were barely computers. Right? Actually, naval architecture became ocean engineering. Nuclear engineering has emerged. There was no discipline in 1950 of nuclear engineering. Aeronautical engineering became aeronautical and astronautical. There was no astronautical engineering at that time. A new discipline has emerged, biological engineering. Biological engineering did not exist even 10 years ago. That's really new. And then engineering systems, which is the unit I actually run. So the point I'm trying to make to you here is this thing called engineering shifting. The disciplines making it up are shifting. And that's important to actually know. It's not a static environment at all. What's happening is that engineering, as it succeeds, moves on to new ways of thinking, which is good. This is the question that a number of people have been addressing. I'm going to argue to you that engineering in the United States has been extraordinarily successful, but the question is, will it continue? And the National Academy of Engineering did a big study called NAE 2020 where they asked this question: how do we help the engineering profession create a meaningful place for itself in a broader multidisciplinary approach required to solve society's problems? Okay, so let's see if we can answer that question. That's a reasonable and interesting question to ask, I think. So now I want to talk about indicators and warnings. So I kind of painted a picture. Engineering has done fantastic things in this country. It's created problems. It's not uniformly good. It's created problems, but it's also created lots of good things. It's certainly changed our lives, and it continues to evolve. Let's look at some indicators and warnings. So this is in this class. For those of you who remember the bad old days of the Cold War, you remember that every May the Soviet leaders would get up and there'd be some different set every year that would show up in the May Day parade. And there'd be all these missiles that get paraded past them, and people would watch from afar. Oh, this person is there, or that person is there. What does this mean? And you just kind of try to assess the patterns. You could never quite tell what it meant, but you would just look at all these indicators, and you'd look at what they were doing, and you try to figure out what was going on. This is in that class. I'm going to show you some data. There's some patterns. What they all mean is less clear, because you could interpret these in several different ways. And then in part, I think it's for us as informed citizenry to think through some of these issues. So the first is there continue to be dramatic change both in context and the development of new technologies. So I'll show you some of those. What's also very clear is, unlike, say, 50 years ago, is that creative engineering, I'm going to argue, not just, I'm going to say, grunt level engineering, but creative engineering is now becoming globalized. So I'll show you some of the data about that. What's also clear is the U.S. economy is shifting, and I'll show you some of the data on that, more towards a service economy. the Department of Defense has had a large role to play in getting engineering going in the United States, and for various reasons, it's actually dropping. That investment is actually dropping. Whether it's dropping significantly, we can debate, but it's certainly dropping. What is clear is the production of engineers in the United States is dropping right now. The edge of research may well be dropping. There is some data which seems to indicate that. What's also clear is that if you do the demographic projections of the U.S. population, is that the part of the U.S. population which is growing rapidly is not going into engineering. Right? It's also clear that because of post-9/11 issues, it's becoming harder to attract foreigners, and there's yet new challenges. So these are all kind of indicators. The question is, what do they mean? So the first is, let's talk about context for engineering, some of the breakthroughs, some demographics, challenges, and economic forces. So there continue to be lots and lots of breakthroughs. I mean, I saw some of them today here. New technologies, nanoscale, information scale, biological scale technologies. These are just some kind of random pictures. Let's actually show you some of them, some of the things. So Moore's law, which is, actually I want to go back. Yeah, Moore's law, which is the rate at which information, processes are increasing in terms of speed, continues unabated. I mean, so this is obviously a log scale. You can see on a log scale, this is almost linear. Through the year 2010, and it just continues. It's the case now. I mean, in this watch here, there's more processing power than existed in a so-called computer in the Second World War. Right? This, you can now. It's now the case. By the way, you ask yourself the question: why is it on cell phones? People are now playing games and that kind of stuff. It's because the chips are now fast enough in there that the actual cell phone itself, part of it, only takes up about a third of the CPU cycles of the chip. It now has cycles left to do other things. It can operate as a phone and also do all this game stuff. That's just going to continue. I mean, that kind of trend continues, right? And there's no apparent end in sight, at least, this is through 2010, but for the next 20 or 30 years, certainly. You see it in terms of, in this case, this is just a different processes in computers. It's still continuing to be exponential change. Exponential change means that it gives us both more challenges and more choices. Something else that's occurring is the decrease in size of mechanical devices. Right? So this is also an exponential scale, decreasing in size. So this is a rice-sized atomic clock. I mean, this is an atomic clock, by the way, the size of a grain of rice. Right? The ability to build these tiny machines is getting better and better and better. These are the kind of machines that people are already talking about, injecting into themselves, right? And doing interesting things with these kind of things. It's the idea that you could have lots of these sensors spread in all kinds of places and gather data from them, and you're talking about the ability to collect and do things cheaply now on scales which even 5 years ago would have been inconceivable. So I'm just giving you a sense for some of the technological changes. Demographics, 8 billion people. 25% increase since the year 2000. What's also clear is that more and more of these people are moving into cities. The trend towards urbanization worldwide is increasing. Right now there's only a few what the so-called mega cities. I mean, cities of the class of Tokyo and Mexico City. I mean, the projection is by the year 2050 there'll be like 30 or 40 of these mega cities. I mean, really huge conglomerations of people in the world. Now, what's very interesting is the demographics are shifting in other ways. In what we consider to be underdeveloped nations, there's a youth bulge. So many of the poorer countries in the world, there's more and more and more young people, not necessarily jobs, by the way, to go with them. And many of the older countries, more developed countries of the world, the population may actually be dropping. Now, it may not be dropping in the United States. That's because we actually let a lot of people immigrate to the United States. But you take a look at countries like Japan. I mean, Japan is a country which you think of as a very developed country. The projections are that by the year 2050, its population will not go up, but will go down. I mean, you know, down by maybe 20 or 30%. Now, for those of you who've been to Japan, you say that's a good thing. It's a very crowded country. But this is changing it changes very dramatically. The other country where the population is going down is Russia, but for different reasons. It's because of the healthcare crisis in Russia. In Japan, it's because they don't allow immigration. And basically, there's not enough people being born to replace the people who are, you know, passing away. Here's the thing to know. If the world were condensed to 100 people, you'd have 56 in Asia, 16 in Africa, only 7 in Eastern Europe and Russia, and 4 in the United States. I mean, this is a world that is changing dramatically. Right? What are some of the economic and societal forces? Obviously, the internet. High bandwidth communication. How many of you have read Friedman's book, The World is Flat? Well, some of you have read it too. Okay, you should read it. It's an interesting book. And by the way, I get nothing from him, you know, so this is not a plug for his book. But one of the things he points out, he says, while we were sleeping, the development of ultra-high bandwidth, mainly fiber optic communications, allows it to be the case that, you know, work can go on seamlessly, you know, in India and in China, you know, seamlessly to us, the work that used to be in the United States. So, you know, he points out in that book, and this is due to these ultra-high bandwidth communications, right? So he points out in that book, you know, something that I found interesting. Since many of you probably have to go through Atlanta to come here, you know, have to go through Delta to come here. Always. Well, do you know, he points out in this book, when you call Delta lost luggage, do you know who you're talking to? You're talking to somebody in India. And that's completely seamless to you. So what is enabling that? It's all going through fiber optic cables underneath the sea. I mean, the phone call there's no delay. The switching is ultra fast. You can't tell that's what you're doing. Right? That's high band. That's high speed communication. Obviously, there's removal of trade barriers. Some countries. We see the growth actually these days of a globalized kind of terrorism. That's different. It's clearly different from the terrorism of the past, which is more local. But this is global terrorism on a scale that's concerning. We see the emergence of technology-based economies, and I'll show you some of the statements in other countries, and sustained investment in higher education, countries like China and India, and I'll show you some of the things they're saying. This is a projection from IBM, so the numbers are approximately correct, looking from 1800 to 2050. I mean, I can't swear to the actual percentages, but they're approximately correct. From 1800 to 2050. So in 1800, it was clearly the case in the United States that most of the economy was an agriculturally based economy. Well, the school system was oriented around that. I mean, that's why in Massachusetts, you know, kids get out early and they have the summers off and so on, because they're expected to go work in the farms, right? By the year 1900, it looked like in terms of services, goods, and agriculture as maybe one-third, one-third, one-third. The year 2000, it's now clear by the year 2000 there is more of the economy in services than there is in goods, and very little of it in agriculture. And by the way, even the small amounts in agriculture manages to feed us. I mean, that's a staggering and important statement upon scientific agriculture and how much it can actually produce with a very small number of people now. You know? But the significance of this is that by and large, engineering has been oriented towards the engineering of goods and not oriented towards the engineering of services. And this is something we actually need to think through very carefully. I mean, is what some people now call service engineering in any way substantially different than making of products? And it may be. And you see kind of interesting, important things actually going on now. What you see is now companies outsourcing or so-called insourcing large amounts of what you might think of was theirs to other organizations, right? So, you know, you see, for example, Fidelity running the retirement accounts of lots of companies. You see IBM actually offering, you know, the information services to lots of companies. By the way, if you thought IBM was a computer company, think again. This is where IBM is actually now starting to get most of its money from, not from selling computers, but from selling services. Right? let's talk about again, on the indicators of warning, some of the problems. I need to actually point out something to you here, which is this is the number of doctoral degrees awarded in the United States, Europe, and Asia from 1975 to 2001. And what you see is from about 89, Europe surpassed the United States, and in about, was it 1998? Asia surpassed the United States. As a matter of fact, the number of doctoral degrees is actually more or less flattened in the United States. This is in science, and this is natural sciences and engineering. And what you see is in various other countries here, but this is particularly China and Japan, it's just going up exponentially at this point. Right? It's already the case that we've lost the production edge. We are already not producing the most, in this case, doctorates in natural sciences and engineering in the world. It now belongs to other regions of the world. It's also the case that we're not replacing people in some key areas. So this is a statement from this guy, Jim Arbaugh. He runs about a third of Boeing. So this is a part of Boeing, the space station, and a bunch of other things, right? And he points out the average age of the aerospace worker in the United States is 53 years old. We graduate 30,000 engineers a year. 80% of the aerospace workers would not recommend their children go in the business room. There have been surveys of these workers, and they say, I would not recommend my children go here, right? So this is, he calls it intellectual disarmament. Basically, they look ahead and they see a workforce getting older and older and not being replenished. And it's significant for them because they say they need US citizens. I mean, the argument is from these people that this is not a field that they can outsource because there's so much national security stuff that goes on there. Now, let's talk a little bit about immigration and innovation, because this is interesting. The first thing is, this has been a country which historically has had a lot of immigration. Right? It's clear it's played a major role in United States science and technology. It's also clear we've attracted the best and brightest in the United States, and many of them have stayed. Many of them have come to go to graduate school and have stayed in the United States. So here's some interesting data. Right now, 40% of all the engineering faculty in the United States are born outside the United States. Right? And that percentage is actually increasing. More than a third of the US laureates are born outside the United States. More than half of the Nobel Prizes in Science were born outside the United States. And here's the question. It's clear that China and India are improving. The question is, will immigrants from China and India still come to the United States? And we are making it more difficult for them to come, and I'll show you some of the data about that. Some of it associated with 9/11 kind of restrictions. So I'm going to argue that historically, one of the ways we have kind of dealt with this engineering problem, if you want, is we've actually imported the people. Right? That's fine. By the way, I'm one of those people myself. That's fine. You know, I mean, I actually don't have a problem with that. The United States has had that as an advantage, and a country like Japan has not. And we're better off for it. Right? But the competition is growing. These are actually statements from the Chinese. They say they want to be a world leader in S&T, science, technology, education, research, innovation. They have declared as a national goal to produce a next generation Nobel Prize winners in China. I mean, not Chinese who come to the United States, by the way, in China, right? India has declared it wants to become a dominant force in the software and service industries. I mean, you might say that they're already well on the way to actually doing this, right? Some other trends. Our share of high-tech imports has declined. Compared to 1985, we now, in terms of, these are now bachelor's degrees per million, we now only grant 75% as many degrees as we did in 1985. Today, India and China graduate 3 times, and together almost 8 times as many bachelor's degrees in engineering as the US. So I'm arguing we've lost the battle already in PhDs. We've lost it in bachelor's degrees in engineering. 60% of all bachelor's degrees in China today are science and engineering. This has increased dramatically. I mean, this is, in the last 10 years, has gone up dramatically. Right? Now, you might say they start from a very low base. It's true they started from a very low base. Right? But it's now the case that 60% of all bachelor's degrees are there. whereas only 30% are in the US. And as a matter of fact, we now graduate 50% more masters in business administration than bachelors in engineering. As a matter of fact, another one of these factoids, these telling factoids, is we now graduate more people with bachelor's degrees in leisure science than we do in electrical engineering. Whatever leisure science is, we graduate more in that field. I mean, this is just, again, going back to the foreign-born in America. This points out what's the percentage of the foreign-born in America at MIT. So this is an interesting point of view because it shows the demographics is shifting in another way. Among engineering faculty 40 and under, 50% are now foreign-born, 50%. Whereas among over 60, the older generation, it was only 28%. This trend is increasing at this point. So the question now is, okay, you might say that's okay as long as all those people come and stay, right? As long as we can attract them and stay. Because historically, we have solved our problems this way. So this is the data showing the trend is actually increasing. So this is bachelor's, master's, doctorate between 1990 and 2003. In each case, you just see it going up. So it's almost 40% of foreign-born. It turns out there is one area where the number of degrees has actually gone up. And so we can debate this. I mean, maybe this is okay. So this shows per year, this is degrees awarded in natural sciences and engineering to U.S. citizens and permanent residents. And in engineering, and this is engineering, it's basically flat for a long time. The one area that's gone up substantially is biological sciences. Now, this is coincident with a big increase in the NIH budget, it turns out. And maybe we could say that the future, this is really a bet by the United States, that the future belongs to biology, and India and China are focusing on the past, which is physics and mathematics-based kind of engineering as opposed to biological area. So that's why I'm putting in the class that these are indicators and warnings. These are patterns. We need to debate what they actually mean. What is definitely the case is if you look at the U.S. citizens enrolled in graduate study, that except for a little blip right in the year 2001, that number has fallen quite dramatically since 1995. So we see the number of U.S. citizens actually going down. We see the percentage of graduate students who are not U.S. citizens continuing to rise. We see a labor force aging. So these are science and engineering occupations labor force aging over the period of the 90s. Basically, you see the red, the average is just shifting over, right? And that's the point that Jim Arbo was actually making. The average age is actually going up, and they're not being replaced. If they were being replaced, you see the average staying about the same. What we also see is that the college-age population is becoming, increasingly diverse. So this is actually the projection on the percentage of individuals of Hispanic origin who will be in the college-age population over time. You see 2010, 2025. This, as a group, is not by and large going into engineering. Right? Now, again, we could debate what this means. I mean, the data indicates that the diversity of the college-age population is going up. And the question is, okay, what's the significance of that relative to engineering? I mean, it's already the case the number, for example, of women in engineering is the number of women in college, is going up substantially. And that's good. Whether or not you see the number of women going to engineering going up is the interesting question. What's also the case is if you look at various fields, the number of the percentage of employed science and engineering degree holders over age 50 in those fields. So if you look, say, mechanical engineering, it's almost 35%. What will warm Ken's heart is that in computer science, it's only 10%. I mean, that's an indication that computer science is a young field, basically, relative to some of those older ones. So maybe you say the future really belongs to computer science and biology, and who cares if we're not producing mechanical engineers or electrical engineers? What is now the case is that a result of 9/11 kind of data is that, as I said, we've historically imported a lot of these people. And the way we do it is what's called H-1B visas. They get H-1B visas to bring them in. That has actually dropped substantially. We're now turning away a lot of individuals. It's also the case that relative to other countries, the rank in natural science and engineering bachelor's degrees, we've dropped from 3rd in the world to 14th in the world in 15 years. So this is the ratio of those people to the 24-year-old population, right? So here's where the United States is, 75 to 1999, and you see some of the other countries here. Again, some would argue, so what, as long as we can outsource all of this stuff? I mean, who cares where the engineering is done, as long as it's done somewhere and we can access it. This just shows men and women going into engineering, and again, it points out this from Science and Engineering Indicators from the National Science Foundation. At least right now, the data indicates that the people from those groups are less likely to earn bachelor's degrees in natural science and engineering, and these are the populations that are increasing in the college-age population. What's also happening, of course, is that why are people so concerned about it? I mean, why is the answer just not, let's outsource everything to India and China? It's because many people implicitly or explicitly believe that our ability in engineering is correlated to our ability in national security, that there's a relationship between the two of them. Now, we can debate how closely coupled it is, but what is certainly the case is that our advantage there seems to be decreasing. What's the case is that you have all these weapons of various kinds, imagery, GPS, night vision goggles, precision munitions. These things are becoming worldwide commodities now. And with the spread of the internet, I mean, this particular slide argues that this is now warfare from Walmart. And that's the kind of world we live in. I mean, so you debate whether you believe that or not. Finally, in this kind of data, what's also the case is that the science and engineering articles, the U.S. share has now, it's now the case that other countries, in this case Western Europe, has surpassed us. So if you now look at the so-called U.S. journals and ask the question, how many of the articles in those journals come from within the United States and how many come from outside? More now coming from outside the United States than inside the United States. All these are indicators of something, right? So I'm going to argue that there are indicators that there are big changes actually going on in research and education in the populations. What the NAE report argues that because of this globalization I talked about, this employment shift, the service economy, this mobility, the best and brightest may or may not be going into this engineering today is very different than it was, say, 50 years ago. There's new challenges. Fresh water continues to be a challenge. Our infrastructure, except for the information technology infrastructure in the United States, is decaying rapidly at this point. Bridges are going down and highways and so on. Energy demands are going up. We have global warming kind of issues. New diseases like SARS and things like that. Obviously security and globalization concern. Lots of new challenges. What's also occurring is pretty plain if you look at the context which engineering is done. Population is more diverse. There's lots of different technological forces. What's very clear, something else is happening to consumers, is that consumers are demanding both higher quality and more customization. That's maybe a part of this information technology revolution. Another thing that's clear is that in terms of the kind of engineering we do, that it is no longer the case that engineering at any price will suffice. I mean, the days of the Cold War are gone. I mean, the days of the Cold War, you could build a place like, I used to live in Oak Ridge, where it used to be the case when I went and lived there, there were literally streams and ponds that were radioactive. I mean, they had big signs of them. You didn't go there. You definitely did not eat the fish from these places. This is now no longer considered acceptable. Right. I mean, environmental issues are important. We see a lot of emphasis these days on managing risk and assessment, a lot of privacy kind of issues. And finally, in this kind of indicators and warnings, you see, I'm going to show you a little survey from a group called the Frontiers of Engineering Participants. So these are people selected as future leaders of engineering. And they were asked the question, how well is your engineering education prepared them for issues that they believe they will face in practice in 2020? And here's the data from that survey, which is really kind of stunning, because this illustrates that somehow our engineering education is not capturing the changes that are going on. The fact that is most of them said that they disagreed with that statement, that it's sufficiently flexible to meet the needs of 21st century engineers. They either strongly disagreed or they disagreed with that statement. And these are the people who are the leaders of engineering, saying basically engineering education isn't cutting it. So the question then is, things need to change. It's time for change. The question is, what is the change to be? Right? I'm going to argue there's a lot of change, and there's a lot of indicators of what's the change to be. So that's the question that the NAE report actually asked, which I started with. So now let's address this question. Unless we're willing to say that it's okay for engineering to become a globalized, let's call it commodity, and it to be done in lots of other places, so that is, U.S. share goes down, and that's okay. We'll outsource it, we'll import it from other countries, unless we're willing to change that. I think the key question is, how do we change engineering education to attract a more diverse group of U.S. citizens into this field? I mean, we might say it's okay that the number of U.S. citizens is going down. I'm going to argue it's not okay, and we should be attracting more into it. So how do we actually do that? So, now I'm going to give you some so-called answers from this is from the National Academy of Engineering report. This is what they say. They don't necessarily say how to do this. They just say this is what needs to be done. So some of these are nice to have. So the first is, it'd be nice to have a public that actually appreciates the impact of engineering on our world. I mean, it's actually the case, there have been surveys done, if you actually ask most of the public, what do engineers do? They actually don't know what engineers do, or they think it's boring. Whatever it is that's done is boring. It'd be nice to have a public that understands engineering. It'd be nice to have a public that recognizes the engineering's ability to address the world's complex and changing challenges. And it's very important that engineers understand and are well-grounded in basically humanities, social science, and economics, as well as just hardcore science and mathematics. A very important question is this. Look at the second one there. Why is it the case that in the US Congress, ask yourself the question, how many of those people are engineers? Actually, I think the answer is one. 535, one or two. You know what the most common profession is there? Lawyer. Oh, yeah. Now ask that question in China. How many of the leadership are engineers? Yeah, I mean, it's like 60 or 70%. So, I mean, this is not endemic to engineering. There's something about the US culture in engineering that's interacting here in some significant way. So the argument is that we want to educate engineers to assume leadership positions. What needs to change about engineering education in the United States so engineers are prepared for leadership? What is it about your legal profession that prepares people for leadership? Right? It's obviously the case we've got to think about how to recruit, nurture, and welcome underrepresented groups into engineering, because that population is increasing. It's the case that we need to think about wise, informed, economical, sustainable development. So, engineering at any cost is no longer the case. We need to think about preparing today's engineering students for careers of the future. One of the things I didn't show you is the data clearly indicates something else is going on, which is the idea that engineers do engineering for their lifetimes seems to be vanishing. There are more individuals now doing engineering and then doing engineering for a while and then doing something else. So maybe we need to think about how to prepare individuals to think about engineering as kind of a liberal arts education is. It prepares one for engineering, but also other things, life in general. You maybe don't think that engineering prepares you for life in general, but maybe it should, right? here are the skills that this is the NAE report argues that engineers should have. And these are very good skills. If we prepare engineers this way, we'll be preparing leaders. Be able to do analysis, be creative, to communicate well, to have leadership skills, to have high ethical standards, be dynamic, resilient, agile, flexible people, be lifelong learners, and do what they do in a socio-technical, operational context. Boy, these are great skills. People like this will make a difference in the world. Right? The fact that I have to put this up indicates it's not occurring now. Finally, let me end by saying that this subject has also been looked at by the Council of Competitiveness. And this is their recommendations. And these are public policy ones, which are kind of interesting. They say that there should be a new act basically that the government should give portable graduate fellowships for students in math, science, and engineering. The fundamental argument is no U.S. citizen who wants to do engineering should be stopped by lack of money. Okay, that's a reasonable goal. They have another interesting one to make sure that the foreign-born actually stay here. They argue that every foreign-born PhD graduate in the U.S. should get an automatic green card. That's an interesting idea, but it's a way to make sure that people actually stay. They say, create an engineering curriculum in K-12 to complement, enhance, and enrich curriculum in math and science. They don't say exactly how to do that, but they say this is a good goal to do. And finally, they argue that there should be more active learning approaches in engineering. Okay, that's good. And they also argue that there should be professional graduate programs in engineering and the analog of professional graduate programs in business and law, because they somewhat exist, but don't exist in the same way they do now. Whether or not these are solutions, I think we should actually debate. So finally, let me say, it's clear that unless you buy the notion that it's okay if the number of U.S. citizens drops and you just outsource talent. And there are some people who argue that's okay. That's the nature of the world, the globalized economy, and that's okay. But if you don't buy that notion, then you say to succeed, we've got to attract within the United States the best and brightest into engineering. We've got to educate them to be ready, obviously to implement new technology, to focus on innovation, because if we're going to succeed in competition with these large economies, we're going to succeed by innovating better, not by just continue the same things we're going to do. And it's a global world. We've got to understand the large-scale global trends. So with that, I think that was my last slide. Right? Yeah, that's it. Let me end. Okay.